Now more than ever, we know it is critical to have the right environment for businesses to grow and thrive. The right regulatory, tax, and other policies at the national level can enable the big thinkers in America to innovate and find durable solutions that are critical for our communities and economy. The American business community needs elected leaders with the courage to reach across the aisle, find common ground, and forge real solutions in pursuit of a better tomorrow. Fortunately, there are leaders working hard to advance policy that support America's free enterprise system and move our economy forward. Here to lead a discussion about collaboration in government is Neil Bradley, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Executive Vice President, Chief Policy Officer, and Head of Strategic Advocacy.
Thank you, Glenn. Here at the Chamber, we believe in the competition of ideas, in markets and in government. Our free enterprise system depends on a functioning government where public policy is vigorously debated through structures that help us resolve our differences. This requires elected officials who not only hold fast to their principles, but are also capable of finding common ground. I'm joined today by two senators who've demonstrated that even in today's polarized environment, they are up to the task. Please welcome Senator Susan Collins, Republican from Maine, and Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Democrat from New Hampshire. Thank you both for joining us today. How you doing?
Good.
Good. Thank you, Neil.
Well, it's an honor to be with both of you again. I want to start where I left in the introduction. You're both senators. You're both from the Northeast, but sometimes you have pretty divergent views on public policy and the direction that Congress ought to take when it comes to legislating. Yet somehow you two have a track record of finding common ground, whether that was broadband in the most recent infrastructure package or your work on the Appropriations Committee. How does that work? What does that process look like? Senator Collins, how do you find common ground with colleagues that maybe you don't agree with?
Well, first of all, Neil, let me thank you for inviting us to participate in this closely divided world that we're living in today. I think Americans at times feel that there is no bipartisanship in Washington. And there isn't as much as I would like, but there are many successful bipartisan efforts. And Jeanne Shaheen and I are a great example of that. We do belong to different parties, but what we do is identify common ground. Neither of us thinks that coming together and discussing issues and trying to find compromise is the wrong approach. I think it's the right approach. And Senator Shaheen has been a wonderful partner. We've worked so well together. Sometimes she takes the lead, sometimes I take the lead. That's not the issue. The issue is that we're both pragmatic and we want to produce results. And the best example of that is the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which represents the greatest investment in our infrastructure in this country since the construction of the interstate system. Senator Shaheen and I worked on the broadband provisions, which are so important to our economy, to business location, to workers being able to work from home, and to education, and also to telemedicine. But we've worked together on many other issues as well, ranging from diabetes to preventing harmful cuts in Medicare that would have been particularly devastating to our rural hospitals. So there's a host of issues that a lot of times the press doesn't focus on, perhaps because it's good news, where we do come together. And it's been a great pleasure to work with Senator Shaheen on so many issues.
Well, Senator Shaheen, I want to bring you into the conversation, want your perspective, but I'd also love to hear about your constituents' reaction. You know, we often hear that voters are looking for people who are going to Washington to fight, but I also suspect they want people who are going to go to Washington and get things done. What's been the reaction to some of your bipartisan achievements from your constituents?
Well, I would echo Senator Collins' comments about our ability to work together, and also about the presentation this morning as a way to encourage people to think about working together. I think probably the most often heard remark that I get from my New Hampshire constituents is, why can't you all just work together to get things done to benefit the country? So I think that's what people are looking for. They may be on one side or the other of the political spectrum, but mostly they want to see the country advance. They want to see their problems solved. And they want us to work together to do that. They're less concerned about what party is in the right. They're more concerned about which party is going to make a difference in my life. And the only way we get there is by working together. I, as a Democratic governor in New Hampshire, I had Republican legislatures my whole time. And one of the lessons I learned that I've put to use, good use here in Washington, is that the best legislation happens when there's a wide body of input into that legislation, and when it's bipartisan, because then people not only work together to get it done, but they work out a lot of the concerns ahead of time before it starts to get implemented. So my experience is that people want us to work together. That's what I've tried to do, and it's great to have partners like Senator Collins, who shares many of my approaches to solving legislation.
So I want to dig in for a moment into the nuts and bolts of how this happens. The old stories were of smoke-filled rooms where senators would get together and resolve differences, and then in the textbook you read about committee markups and what's happening there. I suspect the truth is somewhere in the middle when you all are coming together to resolve issues. Talk to us a little bit about how that happens, and maybe we can use the example that's in the news today. You're both part of a bipartisan working group looking at the Electoral Count Act. This is the law from the 19th century about how Congress counts the electoral ballots after a presidential election. How does that work? How do those discussions take place? How do you build the trust to bring in a group of senators to see if you can come to an agreement? Senator Collins, you want to take us through the process here?
Well, let me talk more broadly about how we do go about this. First of all, we've been able to put together a group of about 22 senators who are interested in trying to find issues where we can come together and make a real difference. It's unfortunate that more work isn't done through the committee process. I actually prefer that approach, and that is the way the Senate used to operate. But increasingly, what we found is that if a group of us can come together, we can make a real difference. I do not believe that we would have had an infrastructure bill pass, and one that's going to make such a difference, not only on roads and bridges and broadband, but water systems in this country. Rail, you name it. I don't think that would have passed, but for the fact that 10 of the senators who belong to our broader 22 senator group came together and worked on the issues with the administration. And believe me, it was hard work. Often we meet in one another's hideaways or offices in the Capitol, and there's no smoke. Occasionally there's a little wine, but there's no smoke. But we took turns, because these meetings went late, bringing in food for us to eat, for our staff to eat. We frequently had members of the administration join us in the discussion after we had determined a framework and where we wanted to go on the infrastructure bill. But I remember one night very well where Jeanne Shaheen and I stayed in my office working through the final details of the $65 billion investment in broadband. And we literally worked past midnight. And I remember we finished up going through the issues at about 11:15 or so. And Senator Shaheen wisely said, let's go through it one more time. And she was so right, because it turned out that there were misunderstandings on one or two issues, and that we'd skipped over one inadvertently. So, but we got agreement that night. It takes persistence, it takes patience, it takes endless meetings and hard work. I had my staff actually add up the number of meetings on the infrastructure bill, and it was in excess of 50 meetings when you count Zoom calls, in-person meetings, meetings just with my Republican colleagues, meetings with everyone, meetings just with Senator Shaheen. So it is a lot of work, and sometimes it's in public through the committee process, because there were bills that we incorporated into the infrastructure package that had gone through the committee process, bipartisan bills, and sometimes it's working one-on-one or in smaller groups. So it varies, but what it does require is a lot of commitment and hard work.
So it sounds like
I would add on the commitment side, I thought about that night in your office too, Susan, and it was really pizza and Diet Coke, I think, that got us through until after midnight, not smoke-filled rooms. But it is that commitment to actually get something done. There were a number of times, I think, in the infrastructure negotiations when things might have fallen apart. But when they did, one person or another, and it was people on both sides of the political spectrum, said, we can't fail. We have got to get this done. And I think it's that commitment that allows us ultimately to reach agreement and find solutions.
You both mentioned the Appropriations Committee, and I noted earlier that you both serve on that committee. This is the committee that approves the annual funding for our entire federal government. It used to be that the Appropriations Committee, year in and year out, was the committee that always worked, because you had to work, right? If you don't come together, if you don't find agreement, the government isn't funded. And we've seen how harmful in the past, and both sides of the aisle, government shutdowns can be for American citizens, for the business community, for our broader nation. How do you see the outlook in the Appropriations Committee? Are there things that need to be done to reinforce the work that you're doing? Are there things that those of us outside of government can do to help support you to find more common areas of agreement? Senator Shaheen?
Well, the appropriations process really needs to work in order to provide some certainty for the business community, for our federal agencies, for states on what's going to happen with federal funding. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked very well in the last couple of decades. As you point out, we've had too many continuing resolutions that provide too much uncertainty as companies and agencies are trying to plan, and that needs to change. I think there has been a lot of agreement among subcommittees on the Appropriations Committee. I know Jerry Moran, who is the Republican senator from Kansas, he and I have switched off as chair and ranking member, and I think this is true of Senator Collins, who has been chair and ranking member on the Transportation and Housing Subcommittee. We have had a lot of agreement, and it hasn't much mattered whether I was chairing or he was chairing. We were able to come to agreement and move forward, and I think for the majority of subcommittees, that's the case. There are a few where there are partisan ideological issues that hang things up, that get bumped up to leadership, and that's a real problem. And we need to try and continue to find agreement, to work together to get things done. Again, I know that's what Senator Collins is always trying to do, and I think we have some positive momentum, hopefully, going into this current fiscal year and the upcoming one, because we need, again, to provide certainty. And that's what I think the chamber and other businesses can do, is continue to advocate for getting appropriations done, for getting a budget done so that they know how to plan, so that you all know how to plan, so that it's an improvement for our economy, for all of the people who are working for your businesses to know what's happening at the federal level. So I hope we will continue to stay committed to that. And I know Senator Collins won't say this, but she hopefully is going to be moving up on the Appropriations Committee in a way that will be very positive as we think about the work we have to do.
You know, Senator Collins, today we've been talking about the state of American business, both competition and collaboration. In the appropriations contest, it's a competition in some respects between a limited pot of dollars, and different senators and the House and the president all have different priorities. So it's not about removing competition from the system, the competition of ideas, is it? It's about framing that competition in a way that produces an outcome. Is that the way that you think about it? And when you're leading potentially your side of the aisle in the Appropriations Committee, is that the way you're going to approach it?
Yes, and I wanted to just add a couple of comments to what Senator Shaheen said. I agreed with everything that she pointed out. When government shuts down because the appropriations process has come to a standstill, it represents a failure to govern. When we pass continuing resolutions, which fund government at last year's level, we increase costs to the business community because of the uncertainty, and thus we increase costs to taxpayers because of the uncertainty. We prevent new starts, whether it's building a new destroyer or repairing a road, from going forward. And that increased costs, particularly nowadays. So it is really important that we get back to the system of passing most of the appropriations bills, if not all of them, prior to the start of the next fiscal year. If we did that, it would make a big difference. It's frustrating to me that there are probably 5 of the appropriations bills that could zip through the Senate with limited debate, a few amendments on each, and be sent to the president. But they're being held up because of disputes on some of the more controversial appropriations bills. As Senator Shaheen mentioned, if all goes well, I will either become the chairman or the vice chairman of the appropriations bill in the next Congress. And my goal is going to be to try to move at least some of the bills on time so that they are actually signed into law prior to the start of the fiscal year. But I'll tell you, there's another key player in this, and that is the administration. The administration this year did not submit its budget till very late. That's understandable in the first year of an administration, but that cannot be the way the administration operates going forward. We've got to have the administration's budget, even though it's very rare that we follow the administration's budget, regardless of who is in the White House. We need to have that document in order to begin in the committee process of hearings, of getting testimony from department and agency heads, and beginning writing the appropriations bills. Our appropriations bill at the Transportation and Housing Committee, it has been ready to go for months. And it's frustrating to me that it has not been brought to the Senate floor. We should at least get through those bills on which there's agreement, like Senator Shaheen's bill with Senator Moran and my bill with Senator Schatz. It used to be with Jack Reed and I, who had a great relationship and always got our bill done in a bipartisan way. So the chamber can help by pointing out the additional expense that the uncertainty of not knowing whether a program's going to be or a project's going to be funded creates for the business community and how that is passed on in the bids that are submitted to federal departments, and ultimately it's the taxpayer that bears the bill.
Well, Senator Collins, Senator Shaheen, you can count on the U.S. Chamber being there to help you achieve your goal of Congress addressing some of these long-standing and even annual issues. I think we identified maybe 3 key ingredients, maybe 3 or 4 key ingredients. Ample supplies of diet soda, ample supplies of pizza, a little bit of wine, and a whole lot of conversation. And whether that's business or politics, those may be good recipes for progress. So, Senator Collins, Senator Shaheen, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you to our audience from across the country and the world who've joined us. We hope all of these discussions have demonstrated the various ways competition drives innovation, builds global leadership, and fosters the bold ideas that will move our economy and society forward. We won't always agree, but if we can agree on the common goal of building an economy that's diverse, resilient, and innovative, then there's little doubt that the state of American business will be strong. Join us again each Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time for a new episode of The Competition, a limited virtual series of policy discussions around the themes you heard today. We look forward to hosting you for these conversations. Thank you for taking part in this year's State of American Business event. We'll see you next week.